Right now, you're sitting somewhere comfortable. Maybe your home. Maybe a place you've lived for years. You know the streets. You know the faces. Staying put feels safe. But 70,000 years ago, your ancestors did something that shouldn't have been possible. They walked out of the only home their species had ever known. Not because they wanted adventure, because staying alive depended on it. For most of human history, Africa was the entire world. Every ancestor you have, going back hundreds of thousands of years, lived and died on that one continent. Then, in a relatively narrow window of time, small groups began pushing north, across land that is now some of the most hostile desert on Earth. And somehow, they made it. Somehow, their descendants ended up everywhere, from frozen tundras to tropical islands thousands of miles from where the story began. Why leave, though? Why walk into the unknown when the known world, however difficult, was at least familiar? The old answer used to be simple curiosity. Humans explore. That's just what people do. But that explanation doesn't hold up well under real scrutiny. Curiosity doesn't drive a species across a continent when the odds of dying are high and the reward is invisible. Something more urgent was happening, and the deeper researchers dig, the stranger the real story becomes. Start with the climate. Around 70,000 years ago, Africa went through violent swings between wet and dry periods. Geologist and anthropologist Rick Potts, who leads the Human Origins program at the Smithsonian, has spent decades studying how these fluctuations shaped human evolution. His research points to something counterintuitive. It wasn't stability that made humans adaptable, it was instability. Potts argues that the unpredictability of the environment, the constant collapse and reformation of lakes, grasslands, and forests, selected for a very specific kind of creature. One that could improvise, one that didn't rely on a single food source or a single strategy to survive. That flexibility became the seed of everything that followed. Picture it. Green valleys turning to dust within a single lifetime. Rivers your grandparents fished in, gone by the time you have grandchildren of your own. You'd learn quickly not to trust the land too much. You'd learn to move. Then there's an even more dramatic possibility. Roughly 74,000 years ago, a volcano on the island of Sumatra erupted with a force almost impossible to picture. Mount Toba didn't just destroy the surrounding region. According to a theory proposed by anthropologist Stanley Ambrose at the University of Illinois, the eruption may have thrown enough ash and sulfur into the atmosphere to trigger a volcanic winter lasting years, possibly longer. Global temperatures dropped. Forests that once supported large populations thinned out. Some genetic evidence suggests human populations may have shrunk dramatically around this time, squeezed down to a fraction of what they once were. Imagine the sky turning strange. Not the sunrise you knew, not the warmth you expected, just ash and cold, and hunger creeping into a world that used to feed you without much effort. Not every scientist agrees on how severe the Toba event actually was. Some argue the population bottleneck has been overstated, but the pattern across multiple lines of evidence points in the same direction. Life in Africa, at various points, became precarious enough that staying meant risking extinction. And when the place that once sustained you turns hostile, walking toward the unfamiliar stops being a leap of faith. It becomes the only rational choice left. But leaving Africa wasn't a single dramatic exodus. It looked more like a series of small, uncertain pushes outward, many of which likely failed entirely. Chris Stringer, a paleoanthropologist at the Natural History Museum in London, has spent his career piecing together how these migrations actually unfolded. His research suggests there wasn't one clean wave of humans marching confidently into new territory. There were multiple attempts spread across tens of thousands of years, some ending in isolated populations that eventually died out, leaving no living descendants at all. Think about that for a moment. Some of the people who made this journey, who crossed deserts and coastlines no one had ever seen, simply vanished from history. Their courage led nowhere. Their genes stop with them. You are only here because one particular thread out of many attempted threads happened to survive. One especially compelling piece of the puzzle comes from the southern coast of Africa. Archaeologist Curtis Marean, from Arizona State University, has spent years excavating a site called Pinnacle Point, where early humans appear to have relied heavily on shellfish and marine resources during a period of extreme drought inland. His findings suggest that when the interior of the continent became nearly unlivable, the coastline offered something crucial: reliable protein, a predictable food source when everything else had become unpredictable. This detail matters more than it seems. It suggests your ancestors didn't simply wander blindly into new lands hoping for the best. They followed resources. They followed coastlines, rivers, and food. The migration out of Africa likely wasn't one dramatic sprint across a border. It was a slow, patient tracing of survivable paths, generation after generation, each one only needing to go slightly further than the last. So picture the journey not as an adventure story, but as a quiet, desperate negotiation with the land itself. A family group noticing the berries are gone this year, noticing the river is lower than it used to be, deciding, without any of the certainty you have when you make choices today, to walk a little further than their parents ever had. And once they crossed into new territory, something else happened. They encountered other humans already there. Not modern humans like themselves, but other species entirely. Neanderthals in what is now the Middle East and Europe, Denisovans further east. These weren't distant alien creatures. Genetic evidence recovered from ancient bones shows that your ancestors interbred with them. If you carry any European or Asian ancestry, a small percentage of your genome, often between 1 and 2%, likely traces back to Neanderthals. A living fingerprint of an encounter that happened tens of thousands of years ago between two different kinds of humans meeting for the first time. That's the part that rarely gets said clearly enough. Leaving Africa didn't just mean surviving deserts and droughts, it meant walking into a world already occupied by other conscious, tool-using, fire-controlling humans who had their own histories, their own adaptations, their own claim to the land. Two branches of the same family tree, separated for hundreds of thousands of years, suddenly standing face to face again. What must that have felt like? Meeting something almost but not quite like yourself. The migration succeeded ultimately not because the people who made it were fearless, but because they were adaptable in exactly the way Rick Potts describes. They could eat differently when food changed. They could build differently when climate changed. They could form new alliances even across species lines when survival demanded it. Rigid creatures die when the world shifts beneath them. Flexible ones find a way through. This is where the story stops being ancient history and starts becoming something closer to a mirror. You inherited that same underlying architecture, not the specific skills of tracking migrating herds across a drying savanna, but the deeper trait beneath it, the capacity to adapt when the environment around you no longer supports the life you used to live. Every time you've had to leave a job that no longer worked, a relationship that no longer fit, a city that no longer felt survivable, some very old part of your biology has been quietly doing exactly what it was built to do. You don't consciously remember Mount Toba. You don't remember the coastline at Pinnacle Point, or the first uncertain meeting with a Neanderthal band in an unfamiliar valley. But your body carries the outcome of all of it. The restlessness that pulls at you when things feel stagnant. The instinct to search for somewhere better, when the ground beneath you stops being reliable. That isn't a flaw in your character, it's an ancient survival strategy still running quietly in the background of a modern life. So the next time you feel that pull, the itch to leave a situation that no longer serves you, to search for something better beyond the edge of what's familiar, remember what that feeling actually is. It's not weakness, and it's not distraction. It's the same instinct that carried a handful of humans out of a drought-stricken, ash-covered Africa, through unfamiliar lands, past other kinds of humans, all the way to wherever you happen to be sitting right now. You're not just comfortable where you are. You're the descendant of the ones who refused to stay comfortable when comfort stopped meaning survival.